welcome back to Spinning Iris. It is day 22 of Banned Book Month, which means it is time for chapter 22 of Candide by Voltaire. Now, Candide and Martin have arrived in France. Let's find out what happens. Are you ready? Let's go. Chapter 22. What happened to Candide and Martin in France. Candide stopped in Bordeaux only long enough to sell a few Eldorado pebbles and provide himself with a good carriage, a two-seated one, for he could no longer do without his philosopher Martin. To his sorrow, however, he had to part with his sheep. He gave it to the Bordeaux Academy of Science, whose annual prize was awarded that year to the author of the best essay on the subject of why this sheep's wool was red. The winner was a scholar from the north who demonstrated by A plus B minus C divided by Z that the sheep had to be red and would die of sheep pox. However, all the travelers Candide met at the inns along the road said to him, "We're going to Paris." This general eagerness finally gave him a desire to see the French capital. It would not take him very far off the road to Venice. He entered the city through the suburb of Saint-Marceau, and thought he must be in the ugliest village in Westphalia. Candide had scarcely put up at an inn when he was attacked by a slight illness caused by fatigue. Since he wore an enormous diamond on his finger, and since a prodigiously heavy strong-box had been noticed among his baggage, he was immediately surrounded by 2 doctors he had not sent for, several intimate friends who would not leave him, and 2 pious and charitable ladies who kept him supplied with hot broth. "I remember being ill myself during my first stay in Paris," said Martin. "I was very poor, so I had no friends, altruistic ladies, or doctors. I recovered." With the aid of medicines and bloodlettings, Candide's illness became serious. A regular visitor of the neighborhood came to him and gently asked for a note payable to the bearer in the next world. Candide flatly refused. The pious ladies assured him it was the latest fashion. He replied that he was not a fashionable man. Martin wanted to throw the visitor out the window. The clergyman swore that Candide would not be buried. Martin swore that he would bury the clergyman if he continued to bother them. The quarrel became heated. Martin took him by the shoulders and roughly shoved him out of the room. This caused a great commotion, and a police report was made of the incident. Candide recovered, and during his convalescence a number of distinguished people came to have supper with him. They gambled for high stakes. Candide was amazed that he never had any aces in his hand, but Martin was not surprised. Among those who showed him around the city was a little abbé from Périgord, one of those assiduous, constantly alert and obliging, shameless, fawning, and accommodating people who lie in wait for passing strangers, tell them all the scandalous gossip of the city, and offer them pleasures at any price. First he took Candide and Martin to the theatre, where a new tragedy was being presented. Candide was seated near several wits. This did not prevent him from weeping during perfectly performed scenes. During the intermission, one of the quibblers beside him said to him, "You're wrong to weep. That actress is very bad. The actor playing with her is worse still, and the play is even worse than the cast. The author doesn't know one word of Arabic, yet the scene is in Arabia. Furthermore, he's a man who doesn't believe in innate ideas. Tomorrow I'll bring you 20 pamphlets written against him." "How many plays have been written in France?" Candide asked the abbé. 5,000 or 6,000. "That's a lot," said Candide. "How many of them are good?" 15 or 16, replied the abbé. "That's a lot," said Martin. Candide was greatly pleased by an actress who played the part of Queen Elizabeth in a rather dull tragedy that is sometimes performed. "That actress is very attractive," he said to Martin. "She bears a slight resemblance to Lady Cunegonde. I'd like to pay my respects to her." The abbé offered to take him to her house. Candide, brought up in Germany, asked what the proper etiquette was, and how queens of England were treated in France. "That depends," replied the abbé. "In the provinces they're taken to an inn. In Paris they're respected when they're beautiful, and thrown into the garbage dump when they're dead." "Queens in the garbage dump!" exclaimed Candide. "Yes, it's true," said Martin. "The abbé is right. Oh, I was in Paris when the Mademoiselle Monime passed from this life to the next, to use a common expression. She was refused what these people call the honors of burial. In other words, the honor of rotting with all the beggars of the neighborhood in some sordid cemetery. She was buried all by herself at a corner of the Rue de Bourgogne, which must have caused her great sorrow, because she had a noble mind." "That was very impolite," said Candide. "What can you expect?" said Martin. "That's how these people are. Imagine every possible contradiction and inconsistency, and you will find them all in the government, law courts, churches, and entertainments of this odd nation." "Is it true that people in Paris are always laughing?" asked Candide. "Yes," said the Abbé, "but they're burning with rage at the same time. They complain about everything with gales of laughter, and they even laugh while they commit the most abominable crimes." "Who's that fat pig," said Candide, "who was talking so vehemently against the play that made me weep so much, and against the actors who gave me so much pleasure?" He's a spiteful man," replied the Abbé, "who earns his living by attacking all plays and all books. He hates anyone who succeeds, just as eunuchs hate anyone who makes love. He's one of those snakes of literature who feed on filth and venom. He's a hack." "What do you mean by a hack?" asked Candide. "A man who writes for cheap rags. This conversation took place on the staircase as Candide, Martin, and the Abbé watched the people streaming out of the theatre after the performance. "Although I'm very eager to see Lady Cunegonde again," said Candide, "I'd still like to have supper with Mademoiselle Clairon, because she made a deep impression on me." The Abbé was not the kind of man who could call on Mademoiselle Clairon. She received only distinguished company. "She's engaged this evening," he said, "but allow me the honour of taking you to visit a lady of quality, in whose house you'll come to know Paris as though you'd been here for 4 years." Candide, curious by nature, let the Abbé take him to the lady's house in the Faubourg Saint-Honoré. A faro game was in progress when they arrived. There were 12 gloomy players, each holding a little stack of cards, a dog-eared record of his misfortunes. Deep silence reigned. The players' faces were pale. The banker's was tense. The lady of the house was sitting beside this merciless banker, and her sharp eyes instantly spotted all the players who fraudulently dog-eared their cards. She made them unbend the corners with strict but polite attention, and never showed any anger for fear of losing her clients. She had given herself the title of Marquise de Parolignac. Her 15-year-old daughter sat at the table with the others and warned her mother with a wink each time one of the poor players tried to repair the ravages of fortune by cheating. When the Abbé, Candide, and Martin walked in, no one stood up, greeted them, or even looked at them. Everyone was profoundly occupied with the cards. "Baroness Thunderten-Tronckh was more civil," said Candide. Meanwhile, the Abbé was saying something in the Marquise's ear. She stood up halfway, honoured Candide with a gracious smile, and gave Martin a thoroughly dignified nod. She'd offered Candide a seat and a seat of cards. He lost 50,000 francs in 2 draws, after which they all sat down to supper in good spirits. Everyone was surprised by Candide's lack of concern over his loss. The footmen said to each other in their footman language, "He must be some English milord." The supper was like most Parisian suppers. Silence at first, then a burst of unintelligible chatter, then witticisms that were mostly vapid, false rumours, bad reasonings, a little politics, and a great deal of slander. They even spoke about new books. "Have you seen," said the Abbé, "the new novel written by Monsieur Gauchat, Doctor of Theology?" "Yes," replied one of the guests, "but I couldn't finish it. All kinds of senseless things have been written, but the writings of Monsieur Gauchat, Doctor of Theology, are the most senseless of all. I'm so disgusted with the enormous mass of abominable books with which we're flooded that I've taken to playing faro." "And what about Archdeacon T.'s essays?" said the Abbé. "What do you think of them?" "Oh, what a deadly bore," said the Marquise de Parolignac. "What pains he takes to tell you things everyone already knows. How heavily he discusses things that aren't even worth being passed over lightly. How witlessly he takes over other people's wit. How he spoils everything he steals. How he disgusts me. But he won't disgust me any more. I've read a few of the Archdeacon's pages, and that's enough." Seated at the table was a man of learning and good taste who confirmed what the Marquise had said. The conversation then turned to tragedies. The Marquise asked why there were tragedies which were sometimes performed, but which were unreadable. The man of good taste explained quite clearly how a play could arouse some interest, yet have no merit. He proved in a few words that it is not enough to bring in one or two of those situations which are found in novels and which always captivate an audience, but that a dramatist must be original without being eccentric, that he must be often sublime and always natural, that he must know the human heart and make it speak, be a great poet without letting any of his characters sound like a poet, have a perfect command of his language, and write it with purity and continuous harmony, without ever sacrificing meaning to rhyme. A playwright who doesn't observe these rules, he added, may turn out one or two tragedies that will be applauded in the theatre, but he'll never be regarded as a great writer. There are very few good tragedies. Some tragedies are actually idylls in well-written, well-rhymed dialogue. Some are political arguments that put you to sleep, or long-winded dissertations that exasperate you. Others are wild ravings written in a barbarous style, filled with disconnected chatter, long declamations to the gods because the author doesn't know how to speak to men, false maxims, and bombastic commonplaces. Candide listened attentively to these remarks, and conceived a high opinion of the speaker. Since the Marquise had been careful to seat him beside her, he leaned close to her ear, and took the liberty of asking her who that man was who spoke so well. "He's a scholar," said the Marquise, "who never plays faro. The Abbé occasionally brings him to my house for supper. He knows all about tragedies and books. He's written a tragedy that was hissed when it was performed, and a book that has never been seen outside his bookseller's shop, except for one inscribed copy which he sent to me." "What a great man," said Candide. "He's another Pangloss." Then turning toward him, he said, "Sir, am I right in assuming that you think everything is for the best in the physical and moral world, and that things could not have been otherwise?" "Sir, I think nothing of the sort," replied the scholar. "It seems to me that everything is going wrong in this country, that no one knows his rank or his responsibilities, and that except during supper, when people are in rather good spirits, and seem to get along with each other fairly well, the rest of the time is spent in senseless quarrels. Jansenists against Molinists, Parliament against Church, men of letters against men of letters, courtiers against courtiers, financiers against the people, wives against husbands, relatives against relatives. It's an endless war." "I've seen worse," replied Candide, "but a wise man who later had the misfortune to be hanged taught me that such things are exactly as they should be. They are the shadows in a beautiful picture." "Your hanged philosopher was an arrogant jester," said Martin. "Your shadows are actually horrible blemishes." "The blemishes are made by men," said Candide. "They can't avoid making them." "Then it's not their fault," said Martin. Most of the gamblers to whom this talk was unintelligible were drinking. Martin began a discussion with the scholar, while Candide recounted part of his adventures to the lady of the house. After supper, the Marquise took Candide into her boudoir, and invited him to sit down on a couch. "So you're still madly in love with Lady Cunegonde of Thunder ten Tronckh?" she said to him. "Yes, madam," replied Candide. "You answer me like a young man from Westphalia," said the Marquise, with a tender smile. "A Frenchman would have said to me, 'It's true that I once loved Lady Cunegonde, but now that I've seen you, madam, I'm afraid I'm no longer in love with her.'" "I'm sorry, madam," said Candide. "I'll answer you any way you like." "Your passion for her," said the Marquise, "began when you picked up her handkerchief. I want you to pick up my garter." "I'll be glad to," said Candide, and he picked it up. "And now I want you to put it on me," said the lady, and Candide put it on her. "You see," she said, "you're a foreigner. I sometimes make my Parisian lovers languish for 2 weeks, but I'm giving myself to you the first night, because a lady ought to do the honours of her country to a young man from Westphalia." Having noticed 2 enormous diamonds on the young foreigner's hand, she praised them so enthusiastically that they passed from his fingers to hers. After leaving the Marquise's house with the Abbé, Candide felt some remorse over having been unfaithful to Lady Cunegonde, and the Abbé shared his sorrow. He had received only a small part of the 50,000 francs Candide had lost at cards, and of the value of the 2 diamonds that had been half extorted from him. His plan was to draw as much profit as he could from any advantages his acquaintances with Candide might bring him. He talked to him a great deal about Cunegonde, and Candide told him he would beg her to forgive him when he saw her again in Venice. The Abbé redoubled his amiable attentions. He took an affectionate interest in everything Candide said, everything he did, everything he wanted to do. "So, you're going to meet her in Venice?" he said. "Yes," replied Candide. "I absolutely must go and find Lady Cunegonde." Then, carried along by the pleasures of speaking about the object of his love, he related, as he was wont to do, part of his adventures with that illustrious Westphalian lady. "Lady Cunegonde must be highly intelligent," said the Abbé, "and she must write charming letters." "I've never had a letter from her," said Candide. "After being driven from the castle because of my love for her, I naturally couldn't write to her. Then shortly afterward I learned that she was dead. Then I found her again. Then I lost her. And now I've sent a messenger to her 6,000 miles from here, and I'm waiting for an answer." The Abbé listened attentively and seemed thoughtful. He soon took leave of the two foreigners, after giving them each an affectionate embrace. When Candide awoke the next morning, he received a letter worded as follows: "My dearest love, I have been ill in this city for a week now, and I have just learned that you are also here. I would fly to your arms if I could move. I was told about your voyage to Bordeaux. I left the faithful Cacambo and the old woman there, and I expect them to join me here soon. The governor of Buenos Aires took everything, but I still have your heart. Come to me. Your presence will either bring me back to life or make me die of pleasure." This charming and unexpected letter filled Candide with inexpressible joy, and the illness of his dear Cunegonde overwhelmed him with sorrow. Torn between these two sentiments, he took his gold and diamonds, and went with Martin to the hotel where Lady Cunegonde was staying. He walked in trembling with emotion, his heart pounding, his voice choked by sobs. He tried to draw back the bed curtains, and wanted to have some light brought in, but the maid said to him, "No, you mustn't, light would kill her," and abruptly closed the curtains again. "My dearest Cunegonde," said Candide, weeping, "how do you feel? If you can't see me, at least speak to me." "She can't speak," said the maid. The lady then put out a plump hand from the bed. Candide bathed it with his tears for a long time, then filled it with diamonds, leaving a bag full of gold on the armchair. In the midst of his rapture, an officer of the watch came into the room, followed by the Abbé and a squad of soldiers. "Are these the two suspicious strangers?" he said. He immediately had them seized and ordered his men to take them to prison. "This isn't the way travelers are treated in El Dorado," said Candide. "I'm more of a Manichean than ever," said Martin. "But where are you taking us, sir?" asked Candide. "To a dungeon," replied the officer. When he had regained his self-possession, Martin decided that the lady pretending to be Cunegonde was an impostor, that the Abbé was a scoundrel who had taken advantage of Candide's innocence as quickly as he could, and that the officer was another scoundrel who could easily be gotten rid of. Not wishing to expose himself to judicial proceedings, enlightened by Martin's advice, and still impatient to see the real Cunegonde, Candide gave the officer 3 little diamonds worth about 30,000 francs each. "Ah, sir," said the man with the ivory stick, "if you'd committed every crime imaginable, you'd still be the most honest man in the world. 3 diamonds, each one worth 30,000 francs! Sir, I'd rather die than take you to prison. All strangers are being arrested, but leave everything to me. I have a brother at Dieppe in Normandy. I'll take you there, and if you have a diamond to give him, he'll take care of you the same as I would." "But why are all strangers being arrested?" asked Candide. The Abbé answered him, "Because a beggar from Artois heard some people talking nonsense, and that was enough to make him try to commit a parricide. Not like the one of 1610 in May, but like the one of 1594 in December, and like several others that have been committed in other years and other months by other beggars who had heard people talking nonsense." The officer then explained what the Abbé was referring to. "Oh, the monsters!" cried Candide. "What! Can such horrors occur among a people who sing and dance? I'm eager to get out of this country where monkeys harass tigers. I've seen bears in my country, but I've seen men only in El Dorado. In the name of God, sir, take me to Venice, where I must wait for Lady Cunegonde." "I can take you only to Lower Normandy," said the officer. He immediately had the irons removed, said he had been mistaken, sent his men away, and took Candide and Martin to Dieppe, where he left them in the hands of his brother. There was a small Dutch ship in the harbour. The Norman who, with the help of 3 diamonds, had been made into the most obliging of men, embarked Candide and his retinue on this ship, which was about to sail for Portsmouth in England. It was not the way to Venice, but Candide felt that he had just been delivered from hell, and expected to resume his journey to Venice at the first opportunity. Whew. That's the end of chapter 22 and Candide's adventures in France. Goodness me. If you thought Candide was innocent before this chapter, you definitely know he is now. Let's see, there were a few notes in this chapter, which I'll relate to you now. Let's see. For a time in Paris, extreme unction was refused to anyone who did not have a document signed by a non-Jansenist priest certifying that he was not a Jansenist. So that was the Jansenist thing. The F that was there. Fréron, a journalist with whom Voltaire carried on a bitter feud. So there's some heavy poking there. And referring to the dog-earing of cards, players could dog-ear their cards to indicate that they were going to let their winnings ride on the next draw, but some players would try to cheat by dog-earing their cards without having won on the previous draw. Okay. I know about as much about Pharaoh as Candide. From paroli, the name given to the practice of letting one's winnings ride on the next draw, and Abbé Trouble, another enemy of Voltaire's, was a T referred to. That's it for the notes. Whew. And we'll find out what happens to Candide in England tomorrow. I hope you'll join me then. Take care. Bye-bye. And happy birthday, Bilbo Baggins.